The town of Oakhaven was a place of quiet routines and long-held suspicions. It sat nestled in a valley, surrounded by dense forests and the winding, lazy Oakhaven River. Everyone knew everyone, and everyone knew the story of the old cabin on the edge of the woods. It had belonged to a reclusive old hunter, and when he passed away, it was left to his grandson, a man no one knew. The grandson, a veteran of a long and brutal war, had arrived a few years ago. His name was Elias Thorne. He was a ghost of a man, thin and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to hold all the sorrow of the world. He did not smile, he did not speak. He just lived in his cabin, a place of mystery and foreboding. The townspeople feared him. They whispered stories about him, tales of a man who was broken, who had seen too much, and could not be trusted. They kept their distance, crossing the street when they saw him in the rare instances he came to town for supplies. He was a shadow, a figure of a man who was no longer quite human. He was the mad veteran, a caricature of their fears. The children were told to stay away from the woods near his cabin, and the adults followed their own silent rules of avoidance. Elias did not seem to mind. The isolation was what he had sought. He was a man who had been a part of a unit, a close-knit group of soldiers who had trusted their lives to one another, and he had lost them all. The silence of the woods was a comfort, a stark contrast to the deafening roar of explosions and the shouts of men he could still hear in his dreams. His days were a monotonous rhythm. He woke with the first light, drank a cup of black coffee, and then spent his hours tending to the cabin and the land. He had a small garden where he grew his own food, and he hunted in the forest, a skill he had perfected in a different kind of wilderness. He was a man of routines, and routines were the only thing that kept him tethered to reality. He was not a happy man, but he was surviving. The pain of his past was a constant companion, a ghost that sat at his table and walked with him on his trails. He did not have a job, he did not have friends, and he did not have a family. His only connection to the living world was the occasional trip to the town's general store. He would buy flour and sugar, paying with crisp bills and leaving without a single word. The store owner, a kind old man named Arthur, would just nod in return, a silent acknowledgement of a transaction between two worlds. The town's fear of him was a shield, a wall he had unknowingly built around himself. It kept the prying questions away, the well-meaning but useless words of sympathy. Oh. He did not want to be a project. He did not want to be saved. He just wanted to be left alone with his ghosts and his memories. He felt a profound sense of failure, a feeling that no matter what he did, he could not outrun the horrors he had witnessed. He had a purpose once, a singular focus that had defined his existence. Now he had nothing. He was just a man with a past that was too heavy to carry. It was on a cold, drizzling autumn day that everything changed. A storm was brewing, and the wind howled through the trees. Elias was inside his cabin, mending a tear in his jacket, when he heard a faint scratching at his door. He froze. He was not expecting anyone. He did not want to see anyone. The scratching came again, a bit more desperate this time, followed by a low, mournful whimper. His military training, the part of him that was always on high alert, kicked in. He grabbed the rifle he kept by the door, his heart pounding in his chest. He was a man of caution, and the unknown was always a threat. He slowly opened the door, and his rifle was lowered. There, shivering on his porch, was a dog. It was a large, shaggy creature, a mix of a Labrador and something else. Its fur was matted and caked with mud, and a long, angry scar ran across its face. Its tail was tucked between its legs, and its eyes, a deep, frightened brown, looked at him with a mixture of fear and a desperate hope. The dog whimpered again, a pathetic sound that tore at something deep inside Elias. He was a man who had seen men die, but the sight of this scared, helpless animal broke through his defenses. This was not a threat. This was a life in need. He did not think twice. He stepped back and gestured for the dog to come inside. The dog hesitated for a moment, its body trembling, and then, as if understanding the unspoken invitation, it slunk inside the cabin. The warmth of the fireplace seemed to soothe it, and it collapsed onto the hearth, its body heaving with exhaustion. Elias closed the door. The cabin was no longer just a place of solitude. It was now a refuge for two. He knelt down beside the dog, his trained hands moving with a newfound gentleness. He found a small, ragged rope around its neck, a sign that it had been abandoned. He carefully cut the rope away, and then went to get a bowl of water and a plate of the leftover stew he had made the night before. The dog drank greedily, but it ate slowly, as if it was not used to a full meal. The dog stayed. It did not try to run away. It just stayed, a silent companion in a silent cabin. Elias, who had been a man of solitude for so long, found his routine changed. He was no longer just tending to himself. He had another life to care for. He cleaned the dog, brushing the matted fur until it was soft and shiny. He named it Shadow, for the way it followed him everywhere he went. Shadow was a ghost, just like him, and they were two ghosts in a lonely cabin, but somehow, they were not so lonely anymore. Elias would talk to Shadow, telling it about his day, about the garden, about the squirrels he saw in the trees. The silence was no longer a burden. It was filled with a new, quiet presence. The townspeople noticed the change. The butcher, a man named George, saw Elias buying 2 pounds of ground beef one day. He did not ask questions. He just watched as Elias paid for the meat with a small, almost imperceptible smile on his face. A young girl, lost while hiking in the woods, saw Elias walking with a large dog. She was scared at first, her mind filled with the stories she had heard. But the dog, seeing her, ran to her and licked her hand. Elias, seeing her fear, just smiled and said, "He is a good boy. Do not worry." The girl, confused but no longer afraid, went on her way, a new story to tell. The legend of the mad veteran began to change. It was no longer a story of fear, but a story of a man who had found a dog. A story of a man who, in his own way, was healing. The people of Oakhaven, who had always judged from a distance, began to see the truth. Elias was not mad, he was just broken, and the dog, Shadow, was helping him piece himself back together. One day, Arthur, the general store owner, saw Elias sitting on his porch with Shadow beside him. The sight was so peaceful that he took a moment to just stand and watch. He saw the way Elias's hands, the same hands that had been trained to kill, gently stroked the dog's head. He saw the way Shadow leaned into his touch, a silent testament to the trust that had grown between them. He saw a man who was no longer just surviving. He was living. Arthur walked up to the cabin, a basket of fresh bread and jam in his hand. He was not afraid. He was just a man visiting a neighbor. He sat on the steps and talked to Elias. He told him about the town, about the weather, about his grandchildren. Elias did not say much at first, but then, slowly, he began to speak. He did not talk about the war. He talked about the dogs. He talked about Shadow, about the way he had found him, about the way he had healed him. He talked about the loneliness he had carried for so long, and about the peace he had found in the simple presence of another living creature. The word spread. The town of Oakhaven, which had once feared the veteran in his old cabin, began to respect him. They saw him not as a symbol of the war he had fought, but as a symbol of the compassion he had shown. They saw him not as a monster, but as a man who had been lost, and who had been found by a dog. The town, which had been so quick to judge, was now so quick to embrace. They brought him food. They helped him mend his fences. They invited him to their gatherings. Elias did not accept all of it, but he did not reject it either. He was a part of their world now. He was no longer a ghost. His life with Shadow was a quiet, constant joy. He would take long walks in the woods, and Shadow would run ahead, its tail wagging. He would sit by the river, and Shadow would sit beside him, a silent companion. He had found a new purpose, a new reason to live. He had used his instincts to save a life, and in return, that life had given him back his own. He was no longer defined by his past, but by his present. He was no longer just a veteran. He was a dog owner, a friend, a member of a community. He was finally home. The town had feared the veteran in his old cabin, but what they did not know was that the abandoned dog had not just stepped inside his cabin. It had stepped inside his heart. The shift in the town's perspective was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, a gentle turning of a tide that had been stuck for years. It began with the little things. When Elias came to the store, people would not just nod. They would say, "Good morning, Elias," their voices a little less strained than before. He, in turn, began to respond, a simple morning that was as monumental as a proclamation. The children, who once ran from him, would now wave from across the street, their hands moving with the carefree innocence that had long been absent from his life. He would sometimes wave back, a small gesture that felt like a lifetime of progress. The women of the town, led by the kind but no-nonsense Martha, Arthur's wife, began to leave baskets of fresh baked goods and jars of homemade jam on his porch. They would not stay to talk. They would just leave the gifts, a silent offering of peace and kindness. Elias, who had been a man of hardened isolation, found himself touched by these small acts of grace. He could not, in good conscience, accept them without reciprocating. He began to leave bundles of firewood on Martha's porch, neatly stacked and tied with a length of twine. He left small bags of wild mushrooms he had foraged, and once, a beautifully crafted leather pouch he had made himself. The exchanges were wordless, but they were a new kind of conversation, a dialogue of respect and shared humanity. The town began to see him as a resource, not a threat. When a young boy named Tommy got his foot stuck in a hole while exploring the woods, it was Elias, with Shadow at his side, who found him. Elias, with his vast knowledge of the terrain and his calm, steady hands, freed the boy without a fuss. The boy's parents, who had once warned him away from the mad veteran, came to the cabin the next day with tears in their eyes, thanking him profusely. Elias just shrugged and said, "He is a good boy. He just needs to watch his step." The boy and Shadow became instant friends. Tommy would visit the cabin almost every day, bringing old tennis balls for Shadow to chase, and Elias would watch them play, a soft smile gracing his lips. The cabin was no longer a place of fear. It was a place where a child could be safe. The town's perception of Elias was no longer based on rumor and gossip, but on the simple, undeniable evidence of his actions. They saw the way he treated his dog. They saw the kindness he showed a lost child. They saw the way he accepted their small offerings and returned them with his own. Elias was no longer the mad veteran. He was a man who had been through too much, a man who had found his way back home, a man who, with the help of a stray dog, was learning to be human again. His scars, both visible and invisible, were no longer a source of shame. They were a testament to the battles he had fought, and the peace he had finally found. He was a part of the town now. He attended the town's annual harvest festival, a quiet figure at the edge of the crowd, but he was there. People came up to him and talked, not about the war, but about the weather, about the crops, about their families. He spoke to them, his voice a bit rusty at first, but with each word, it became a little bit more his own. He was no longer a ghost. He was a man. He was no longer defined by the war he had fought, but by the life he was now building. The town had feared the veteran in his old cabin, but what they did not know was that the abandoned dog had not just stepped inside his cabin. It had stepped inside his heart.